Straw Hut Media.
Obviously, she's just stabbed someone, so that's first and foremost a thing, but she will need to step back and kind of figure out what was going on, what happened here, who are the people I want to be surrounding myself with.
Who are we? We're a couple of true crime aficionados.
Kind of like Charles, Oliver, and Mabel, the three main characters in the Hulu original show, Only Murders in the Building, now in season 2.
And we're here making a podcast about a show where the characters make their own podcast about a murder.
I'm your host, Kevin Lawn.
And I'm your other host, Elizabeth Keener.
Why are we here? To solve a murder.
And to try to figure out who the killer is before all is revealed in the season finale.
We may not be in the Arconia ourselves, but we'll get some inside information from members of the cast and crew and clues to help us piece it all together.
Today we'll be talking to the writers of episode 6, Ben Smith and Joshua Allen Griffith, and Adina Verson, who plays Cinda's minion, Poppy White.
Plus, we'll hear from showrunner and co-creator John Hoffman. We'll talk about what exactly makes Alice's betrayal sting so much, the glorious glitter bomb, and Mabel's breaking point.
As of now, we've seen the first 6 episodes, so listeners beware. We're going to give a quick recap. If you haven't watched, hit the pause button, stream episode 6 now, and come right back so we don't spoil anything for you. Episode 6, KK.
Yes.
Cinda Canning is interviewing Jimmy Russo, who has a story about Mabel's violent past.
Alice and Mabel are still seeing each other, but we're still suspicious of Alice. We see her taking a photo of the floor where Bunny died.
Charles is still visiting Jan in prison. Charles. Oliver is taking his DNA test.
Sass Pataki is back now that Brazos is filming again.
The trio decides they need help from Detective Williams to see who the fingerprint on the matchbook belongs to and whether it's blood or ketchup.
Or paint.
So they text the number that told them to get out of the building the night of Bunny's murder, thinking it's her.
Detective Krebs once again tells them all to stop podcasting, and they find out that Detective Williams is on maternity leave and can't be the one texting them.
Right, so they decide to plant fake evidence with a glitter bomb to try and catch whoever has been texting them.
Cinda drops the podcast episode with Jimmy Russo. He claims Mabel chopped off his finger at a Long John Silver and fried it up.
They find out that Charles has been talking to Jan, and they're so distracted that they miss the glitter bomb going off. The person is able to run away without being identified.
Poppy learns that she's never going to get the performance review she wants from Cinda.
Saz shows up to the prison and breaks up with Jan for Charles.
Mabel visits Alice at her studio and finds that she has recreated her apartment and is making some kind of movie about the traumatic events in Mabel's life.
Poppy calls Mabel and shares some of Cinda's secrets.
Then Mabel sees Glitter Guy on the train.
And then Will sends Oliver a video that's going viral of what looks like Mabel stabbing Glitter Guy with a knitting needle on the subway.
Just Will. Look at that. My son sent me a video.
Yo, bloody Mabel's fighting number 2. She just stabbed some dude.
I'll take that hug now.
Episode 6 was co-written by Ben Smith and Joshua Allen Griffith. Ben, you might remember from episode 3 of this season.
And actually episode 3 of last season, too.
But Joshua is a new addition to the Only Murders crew. Before this, he wrote for another Hulu show that rides the line between genres, Mrs. America. He says John Hoffman read a very serious hour-long pilot of his, which got him a meeting. Plus, Joshua had worked as a police dispatcher for a few years. Fascinating. So he had an interesting view on crime.
I got to know a lot of those, types of personalities, and I got to understand maybe a more grounded version of crime, a more gritty version, I suppose. But I think there was probably a part of me that was like, maybe I'll put this in a story at some point down the line. But what it really allowed me to do, because I worked for 3 years on the midnight shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., I watched a lot of television. I read a lot of books. And at 4 o'clock, when things start to slow down, you can be pretty productive. So that's where I wrote my first script. And it was time well spent.
With Ben being a more seasoned upper-level writer and Joshua being the newer addition to the staff, the two of them made a natural team.
It gave me a lot of comfort knowing that I was writing with Ben because I had read other episodes that he had written. And I loved his work on the page. I think when we worked in breakout rooms, I would often get assigned to Ben's room. So we had a sort of a rapport going into the writing experience. And I think also, I would say Ben and I have a similar vibe. We're sort of polite, soft-spoken.
Not us. Not us.
Dudes.
We're the opposite.
It's hard to express, but I think we give off a similar vibe, and he probably thought, they'll get along. They're not going to butt heads, and we didn't.
It was a very easy and fun pairing. Like Joshua and I had never written together before. We're not a writing team, but it was a very fun process, especially considering we'd written all of this during the pandemic where we're on Zoom the whole time. And this was the first time Joshua and we would meet during the, week or so that we had to write. We would meet in person to kind of break the story together and rewrite together. And that was, I'd missed that kind of in-person collaboration and really, rolling up your sleeves together.
For those of you who are curious about how the process works with co-writers, Ben says by the time he and Joshua went off to write their episode, they already had an outline.
Maybe a 5-page document, descriptions of each scene that we'd worked as a group and had the other writers help build out. It had been approved by John and by Dan Fogelman, everyone. And we were kind of sent off in a week to work. And we kind of at the beginning of the time divvied up one of us will write the first half of the scenes, the other person will write the other half. So we can have some sense of flow and continuity between our scenes. But we then sat down together for a day, as Joshua was saying, and if you knew that was the scene you were writing, it was kind of let me walk you through how I think the scene is going to happen. And if there are things that I don't feel confident about yet, or I have questions about, let's spitball, this is kind of a piece of information that's tricky for me to get out. What's the best and most fun way to do it? Until we kind of both felt confident that when we left to write by ourselves for 4 or 5 days, we knew how to get through our scenes. And then we came back together at the end and then again, kind of everything's on the table. Let's rewrite each other's writing. Here's a couple joke ideas. Now that I've seen your pages, I'm realizing my scene in the first act, we don't need that thing. We're repeating an idea. And actually, and sometimes we found ourselves that we'd very separately had very synergistic ideas. I made a very similar joke from that character 3 scenes prior. And there was kind of some weird mind melds that had happened.
Cinda is an awful boss to Poppy. Have you ever felt like you were treated like a Poppy at a job you've had?
Certainly.
Well, you could tell us.
I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm not going to use names.
No.
But I don't know. When Ben and I were talking about the things that I contributed to the Cinda of our episode were honestly things that my best bosses did and told me. There's a line about Katharine Graham that was something that my mentor told me on one of the worst days of work, where I had worked initially as a researcher for her, and then she eventually promoted me to staff writer. She's the one who gave me my first writing job, and there was a brief period where I had to be the script coordinator on that show, and I was an absolute wreck as a script coordinator. I'm pretty detail oriented, but that job ruined me. And I distroed the wrong thing twice in a row, and everybody was emailing me back what is this? And some of the top execs at FX were this, who is this guy? And I got on the phone with her and I was I screwed it up. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. And she was listen, Matthew Weiner once told me, don't be too good at a job that you don't want. And she knew that Mad Men was my favorite show in the world. And so she talked me off a ledge, and you take those sorts of quotes and you give them to evil characters, I guess.
Yeah, it's a great line, though. It really is.
It's a great line.
Yeah. Yes, Ben.
And Ben, how about you?
Only fantastic bosses. I'm not going to fall for that trap that Joshua walked right into. I do think that the Cinda and Poppy relationship we really enjoyed because, and we see both of it, we see that like that reverence, like this infallible boss who like, you know, is difficult, but you see this genius in them and you're willing to like go suffer through the pain. And I think that, and because you see all the great things about them, you overlook or allow the lesser parts. And I think that that feeling of admiration is something that I think Joshua and I talked a lot about, kind of the brilliance you see in someone and what you're willing to forgive as a consequence, or what you are blinded to that a third party like Mabel can kind of see. So that was kind of like I think like the really interesting nuance of that relationship that we like talking about.
Cinda Canning is played by the amazing Tina Fey, yet another iconic comic actor in the Only Murders ranks.
How was it working with Tina Fey for so much?
Oh, incredible. I mean, I'm a huge fan of hers.
This is Adina Verson. She plays Poppy White, Cinda's assistant.
Never did I think I would be doing scenes with her. How crazy. And she's like a beautiful, wonderful human being. She comes in with like a bunch of ideas for other jokes and alternate lines. And she's just like, everything is so easy. And she makes everybody feel easy. And she's just a wonderful person to be around.
Unlike the character she plays, Cinda Canning, a character that feels perfect for Tina Fey.
Yeah, interesting story. I originally auditioned for Cinda Canning. I mean, it was clearly written for Tina Fey, but I think that it was the pandemic and maybe they weren't sure who was available and who was not available. And so I think maybe for a minute she wasn't available, or it looked like she might not be. So the casting office just like put out an audition, and I had gotten an audition, and reading it, I was like, this is supposed to be Tina Fey, but okay. And so I did that audition, and I guess they liked me so much that they wrote Poppy for me.
Oh, wow.
Which is like crazy.
That's a compliment.
That's even better. Wow.
But it was
really
also, it was kind of terrifying also though, because I mean, the way that I auditioned with Cinda, like it wasn't Poppy. And as an actor, like usually when you audition for something, then you know going in what I did is what they want. But I'd never auditioned with Poppy. And they were like, we like you, so we wrote this role for you. And I was like, so then I went and had like an existential crisis. And I was like, do they want me to do what I did for Cinda? Or do they don't know me, so who do they think I am? So who did they write this for? Or do I just do it like what it's written on the page? Like, how did
you resolve that with yourself, or did you talk to anyone?
Don't overthink it.
Yeah, I know. I'm a real overthinker. Actually, the day that we were supposed to shoot, I like was really freaking out about it. And it's so, I mean, it's like, I had 3 lines in that scene, but it was just like during the pandemic, I had like had a baby, from the theater, and the theater had shut down. I had been in my home for not seeing anybody. And then suddenly they're like, okay, you're going to go on set around 100 people and be in a room with Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez and Tina Fey. And I was like, I don't know what my life is.
Wow.
But the first day that we were supposed to shoot, I think somebody had tested positive on set or something, so it was last minute delayed. And by the time they rescheduled, I had like calmed myself down.
From Cinda Canning Productions, this is White Noise. I'm your host, Poppy White.
So Poppy narrates this episode and changes from a villain to an ally. Can you tell us about her character and the journey she is on?
I think maybe there's part of me that saw a little bit of myself in Poppy when I was watching the first season.
Here's Joshua, the co-writer of the episode.
Just not as a writer, but as an audience member and as a fan. And I related a lot to that character in a lot of ways. And the journey of ambition and paying dues and how much you're willing to put up with. Been in some of those situations before. So it was easy for me to relate to it. And also she's put in such funny positions in the first season that I think, I don't remember at what point we thought maybe she could narrate this episode, but I think that first, the cold open where she pulls the microphone to her mouth and starts to narrate her own, fictional podcast. It's sort of what we do as writers who are trying to break in, when we're, support staff in writers' rooms or on the production sides of things. We're watching the people who we want to emulate and that we're learning from. And so I think it all came from that sort of, for me at least, it came from that sort of perspective.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, it was kind of, I feel like the episode for me clicked in some ways when we figured out her opening narration, and what this fictional podcast she was narrating as she watched Cinda, and the theme we had was the stories you tell yourself. And we kind of went through a suite of our main characters, Oliver, everything's going to be okay as he's doing the paternity stuff. That Charles, this time it'll be different or something like that, as he's meeting Jan in prison and not trying to slip back into that. And Mabel, I can have a fresh start, or I can leave the past in the past. Forget what exactly we said, but her with Alice. And it just kind of felt like a moment to take stock of all of our characters and kind of, this is 6. They're kind of right in the middle of their journey this season. And it felt interesting to kind of see where they want to be, or kind of the delusions to tell themselves. But we know it's not that easy. And Poppy has been lying to herself as well. And I think this episode, for all of our characters, there was a big eye opening. Mabel's world's kind of rocked at the end there. Charles is called out in the car. Oliver has this kind of knife hanging over his head in a way, is what's going to happen with this email with his results, that it just felt like a very relatable thing for all our characters, and to kind of tell it through a different side character, Poppy, was kind of a fun opportunity. And we always knew we wanted to return to Cinda and that world, the podcasting world. And so I think Josh and I were both excited at the idea of Poppy kind of being our entry into it.
I really like Poppy, and I really love how they wrote her story, and I have a lot of love for her, so it's really special to be able to share her more.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, Easter eggs, glitter bombs, and what the heck is going on with Alice?
That sounds like a party I've had. In the very opening of the episode, we see Poppy looking over Cinda's calendar. And if you take a second to pause, you'll see some pretty hilarious things slotted into Cinda's schedule.
I remember that conversation. That was a lot of fun to pitch on.
Cinda's a busy lady.
I think when we wrote it in script, we said, we see her calendar, and we'd written maybe 2 or 3 things, and then we wrote, etc. We just kind of left it a little open-ended, but some of the things we had written. And, anytime you put something in script, a month later they're filming, and art department reaches out and they're like, okay, we're making the image for the calendar. We have 2 things, but you said etc. What is etc? And you're like, oh my God, okay, I guess it's time to figure that out.
You know what, Keener? I took a screenshot of the calendar, and I wanted to read just a couple of the events Cinda's got coming up this week.
Woohoo.
Primal Scream every day at 5 a.m. Underwater Pilates, clitoral stimulation with Jake, neck thing, and dinner meeting with limbless Letitia.
Okay. Now that full on sounds like a party I've had in the past, or a couple of parties I've had.
It kind of mirrors your calendar, Keener.
It does. I think they just ripped it right out of my, how they, one of the shows rips from the headlines, the kind of thing in New York. Well, this rips from my calendar.
Rip from Keener's calendar.
And that's what etc. became. And we can't take all credit or all blame for that. I think there was a moment in the writer's room where it's they're asking for etc. What is that? And we had to all yell out some ideas.
Even though Poppy's stuck managing Cinda's weird schedule, we learn that she has larger aspirations when she unplugs the microphone and does her best radio voice.
But even the most convincing fictions have their faults. The truth always has a way of...
I'd be curious to know if she has a podcast voice, like who she's emulating with her Poppy White voice, because it's such a NPR, right.
Soft
Sarah Koenig type of tone. And I wonder if she's got a specific person in mind when she's doing it. She's like, I'm Audie Cornish in this moment, or if
Sarah
she's,
Vowell,
going after Cinda. Yeah. I'd be curious to know that.
We just spoke to the writers of episode episode 6, right? Joshua yesterday, and he was curious if there was a specific podcast or radio host you were modeling when you were doing your podcast narration in the episode of White Noise.
I mean, all the podcasts that I listened to, I feel like I think that I was channeling more NPR,
yes,
than podcast, because I feel like podcast is kind of like gravelly, like kind of real, like.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
I have vocal fry.
Hey, everybody. It's Poppy.
I feel like thinking of fresh air, or like that.
Terry Gross.
Terry Gross, totally. It's like kind of what I was vibing. Yeah.
So this episode, there is a scene that takes place at Bunny's apartment where Cinda and Poppy are with the trio, Charles, Oliver, and Mabel, with the detective played by Michael Rappaport. Can you tell us a little bit about that scene?
Yeah, it was fun to be in. To be in Bunny's apartment, honestly, was really cool. I'll be on the soundstage. There's all these. It's all the apartments basically, and I hadn't seen Bunny's apartment. And usually, when you're shooting in one room, then there's a holding room is one of the other apartments. So you kind of get to know the apartments and the Cinda's recording studio is also on that stage and stuff. But that was my favorite set. Is Bunny's, and there were pictures of little Jane Howdy Shell, little Jane Howdy Shell.
Really?
There were little framed photos all over.
Her, the actress as a young girl.
Yeah, it's they had photoshopped. I think she grew up in Kansas, but they had photoshopped her into some city,
New York kind of stuff. Growing up in New York.
It was so sweet.
Amazing.
With little horn rimmed glasses. Yeah. So it was cool to be on that set, and just the set decoration of this show is incredible. So anytime, I just love looking around at all the little knickknacks on the shelf and the books, and all the choices are just so detailed.
Details, yeah.
But yeah, then that was my first time ever meeting Michael Rappaport, and he's such a character. I mean, everybody in that room was just such a character. And then to have the writers or John Hoffman give him some alternate lines. Alternate lines for Detective Krebs is are pretty funny.
Yeah.
And
do you recall any of those? By any chance?
Anyone
it's
that
probably a while ago. But.
All right.
I know.
I don't specifically. I just remember laughing quite a lot. And honestly, they were probably dirty enough that I wouldn't want to repeat that.
Okay, thanks to you, we're getting more anonymous tips than a Penn Station glory hole.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We know there's an Easter egg in the opening credits of each episode. Can you tell us what that is for episode 6? People might know already, have seen it, but do you know what it is in the opening credits?
I don't.
Did you see KK?
I forget.
Was it something that looked like...
I think I saw it at the very, very end when it's the top of the roof. And I took a picture of it.
You said it looked like COVID.
Tell what it was. It either looks like a firework or like a COVID thing. I'll kind of hold it up to the screen. That's at the very end.
Is that it?
That's probably the glitter bomb.
COVID.
Oh,
the glitter bomb.
Duh.
Yeah.
It's the COVID glitter bomb. Oh my God. Of course it is. Fantastic.
Well, we had that all wrong.
We're great sleuths. KK and I are just brilliant at this. We are just the most amazing people at this.
I can't believe you guys only just realized that this show is an allegory about COVID. You're like a season and a half into it. Come on.
Season 7, episode 21, The Fake Evidence. We tell them we'll put the matchbook inside a Stop and Shop bag in a trash can outside Morningside Park. And then Twist. The evidence is fake.
Saw that twist coming.
It was in the episode name.
Instead, it's a paint bomb.
Okay. That I didn't expect.
Yeah, boom, the bomb goes off, marking our targets. We rush in, make a citizen's arrest. Now we don't have a paint bomb, so we could maybe...
Glitter!
Did you say glitter?
Yeah. If my years in regional theater and wild orgies have taught me anything, it's that there's no getting rid of glitter.
Can you tell us where the idea for the glitter bomb came from?
I'm trying to remember. I think that was your idea, Ben.
It certainly was not from either of our pasts, I don't think, but it was kind of like, I think the way Joshua and I both think, if we're talking about like similar ways of thinking, is it comes from a very logical place initially, and then once you've established the logical groundwork, then you like add the comedy and the insanity on top of it. And so we started from the place of, we have figured out that we are texting someone who we now believe to be the killer. And we know that, but we don't think that they know we're onto them. So what do we do? And so we're kind of like going through all these different permutations of a sting operation. And one idea was brought up was like, the paint money bags at banks. Like that could be a fun thing. Like what if they're afraid to like actually directly confront a murderer? But what if we mark them so we can then strategize or like tell the police or something like that? And then I forget whose idea it was, but it was like, we always look through the prism of how would it be different because it's our characters doing it? And they wouldn't do the version of a paint bomb. It would be Oliver, and Oliver would do a glitter bomb. And so we're like, okay, is this totally insane? Exactly. And there were definitely moments where we thought this was totally insane, but we're like, okay, let's just try it and see how it feels. But that's my recollection of kind of like taking logic to a point and then
he would do
going
that.
Crazy.
I hate glitter, so maybe that was in there somewhere. Anytime I open a birthday card from one relative in particular who's obsessed with it, it's so maddening to me. That might have been in there. I'm sure I've seconded the idea with that because I feel very strongly opposed to glitter.
John Hoffman would say they are two of his favorite shots of the whole season. And I just want to shout out to our director, Shireen. One, and Joshua and I love this shot too. It's the glitter bomb going off. And that was something we loved, as when we wrote it, we were thinking of all the different permutations. Are we inside the car? Are we outside the car? Do they see this thing happening? And we just kind of, in writing it, we're like, it would be kind of lovely if it's a moment for the audience where our characters are on a stakeout, but they get so engrossed in their own story that they forget about why they're actually here. And the audience gets the treat of it. And the characters realize 10 seconds later. And we always loved that idea, and they pulled it off beautifully. So huge kudos to them.
Here's showrunner and co-creator John Hoffman on the glitter bomb.
One of my favorite scenes in the whole season is the stakeout in the car outside Morningside Park, and the perfectly absurd moment that happens when the person they're waiting for comes along, but they're too deep in the middle of an emotional conversation to know what's going on directly out the window behind them. But outside of that, I think, I love getting out in New York as much as possible. This episode held a lot of that. And was challenging. It was very cold out by Morningside Park that day. But it is nice to get out there and feel the realness of New York. And this episode really was a moment where they had to break free because they found themselves too deep in the mire of being, what's going to happen to us next. We have to take a sort of forward motion action ourselves. So out they go. They have to put themselves out there. But putting yourself out there can reveal things by the end of episode 6 for Mabel, certainly, that she's not prepared for.
Yes, there is a big reveal for Mabel. Alice is up to something very strange. First, the Son of Sam card at the end of episode 5. Then we catch her taking a photograph of the floor in Mabel's apartment where Bunny died. And by the end, we see that she seems to be recreating moments from Mabel's life on film.
Mabel, what are you doing here?
What am This is my apartment.
I'm sorry. You weren't meant to see it like this, not yet. Let me explain. I was just trying to help, you know. I was looking at through trauma, through a fine art lens. I was going for something more photorealistic. Mabel, are you okay? Mabel, let me explain.
Totally bizarre, and it made us wonder, are we supposed to understand what's going on? As expected, Ben and Joshua were pretty tight-lipped.
I mean, I think what you can take away from it is that in 5, she's a liar, you know, and she's good at, you know, she was caught by Oliver, or, you know, he thought he did, but she had switched her card or whatnot, that she is duplicitous. How much of her own backstory is true or not true is a fair, open question. And certainly part of her duplicitousness is that she's capitalizing or attempting to capitalize on Mabel's story and her trauma and her fame for Alice's own art. I think still very open questions about what is on it, truthful or not truthful, or duplicitous or not duplicitous. Are her feelings for Mabel? Is it all a long game? Is that what is real there? And or what is her involvement in what happened with Bunny? I think those things are not answered currently. I think what her relation that she's been up to something and trying to progress her own art career through Mabel is kind of what we've discovered at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of describing it. And I think also from a thematic perspective, we were talking a lot about artists and storytellers and the question of, you know, what is up for grabs in terms of inspiration, you know, in our lives when we're looking for the stories that we're telling, what's fair game, what's intrusive into other people's lives, and what's okay to call our own work. And I think that Alice, you know, obviously has taken it a step too far and become a bit of a parasite. But I think there's moments, certainly when I've been writing something, where I've felt the same way, where I felt like I've intruded upon the lives of my family, certainly, and you know, some of my friends. And it's an interesting line to toe, because that line is often the, you know, the moneymaker, the edginess and the thing that gets people interested and excited and holds their attention. So yeah, it's a juicy place to look for a type of artist, I think.
I think you're totally right, Joshua, that we do mind, like we as writers mind that, and it's a very real thing that happens in the artistic community, and I think so. I think in many ways it is totally fair and not out of the ordinary. And for Mabel, the betrayal is that part of what she really likes about Alice is it feels as though Alice doesn't care about the bloody Mabel stuff in the same way that the rest of the world does. That's what sets her apart, only to discover, oh no, you are using my story.
Alice drew Mabel in and made her feel comfortable, and all the while was collecting information as well and recreating it. I think at this point in the season, we don't have, you know, total clarity on what Alice intends to do with that piece of work. Maybe she was doing it for Mabel. That's a question that we eventually answer. But I think that the fact that their relationship was romantic is what makes it a betrayal to me.
There was something about like Mabel jumping into it very quickly, and not necessarily that it became very serious, but like that there was that maybe even as an audience member, as you watch it, you're like wondering and concerned, like, are these good decisions? Is this a good partner? Is this a good thing you're doing? And I think some of that's tied into where she's been. Like, she's just coming out of a really traumatizing first season where she's now bloody Mabel. And I think we were embracing kind of this messiness of her life in that moment and in her romantic decisions. And I think you as an audience member have more clarity in terms of what's going on than even Mabel does. But I think part of this journey of the season is kind of like finding her footing again.
Mabel doesn't exactly feel like she's finding her footing yet.
No, but she did find her knitting needle by the end of this episode. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, Mabel's breaking point, what role Poppy has to play in solving our mystery, and of course, the Whodunit Summit.
So we were really glad to see Saz Pataki back this season. Was that always part of the plan to have Jane Lynch return for season 2?
I mean, I think with this show, like, the short answer is always yes. That we have so many wonderful actors who you kind of pinch yourself that you're working with them. And I feel like John, and multiple times, will look around the writer's room to writers who this may be their first job. And he's like, this is not normal. Like, it's not normal to get this talented group always like wanting, they were always game. And so it was something where we always knew it'd be fun to have Saz back, have Jane Lynch back. It was kind of like, if her schedule would allow it, you know, we have fun little things to do. And it made total sense, like, going back into the Brazos world, that we would see her because she's so rich in that. And then kind of the second layer was like, it feels like a little wasteful to bring her back in a totally expected way and just have her do what we expect her to do. So like, what's kind of the new, how can we integrate her? And it was like, oh, what if we help her with not just Charles's work on stage, but or on screen, but his trouble, like, in his emotional interpersonal life as well.
It was fun having the voice. The voice is pretty much there for the taking. You know, I remember seeing, maybe it was in some of Ben's pages, just the phrase like, "Oh, mama," or something. You know, it's like something that could only really exist in Jane Lynch's mouth. It's just so much fun because it stands out, you know, next to anybody else's dialogue, and it's just so much fun to write.
Hello again, Charles Hayden Sass.
Bear with me here, babe. I'm almost off book. Charles just sent these pages.
What is that? Are those lines?
Roll sound, camera, action. Jan, we need to talk. It gives me no pleasure to say this, but I think we should see other people.
That personal drama that Saz is able to come up with is what distracted our trio when the glitter bomb originally exploded at the park.
Yeah, but luckily or unluckily, by the end of the episode, Mabel has another chance to identify the person who has been texting them.
Who doesn't want to write a scene on the New York subway? You know, I think that was such a cool setting for an act of violence. And I think especially an act of violence that's going to metastasize in a certain way, like via social media or however.
It was a scene that I think we'd kind of had been in our minds since the beginning of the season, since early on in the season. And I don't think we knew when we were going to place it initially, but we knew, right? Like, Mabel says on her opening podcast in episode 1 of season 1, I imagine taking out my knitting needle and taking a guy down to the bone. Like, we bring that back at the start of this season when Krebs plays it on the podcast. We have her, you know, Bunny has been stabbed. She is the main suspect in this case. So we knew that, like, we were thinking of, can we get to a point in the middle of the season where she now actually has stabbed someone? And we can understand the circumstances of what happened, but this puts her in much deeper and hotter water than in the Bunny investigation. In an episode where we've talked about Mabel's past behavior with Jimmy Russo and, like, injuring him, whether or not the events of what happened, as Cinda says it, are correct or not, we've established in her mind, like, this history of violence, that Mabel has rejected that about herself and says it's all lies, only in this moment for it to come to the surface, and just kind of all these muddled questions for identity. So we knew that we wanted her to stab someone in the middle of the season, and, like, how do we get there? And so it was, I think, one, like, we knew we wanted to get there, and we had to work backwards, and working backwards in terms of getting her to this emotionally fraught place. And that was a lot of what that backtracking that Alice scene, and Joshua wrote that, and it was, like, very filmic and very emotional, like her entering this bizarre, disorienting world, like to be in the studio that looks like home, seeing people from her life that are not quite those people, and that causes a break, you know. And we've established she's had this fragility of her memory and her mind in the previous, with the night of Bunny's death. Like, how can we like get her there again? And so, it was a fun scene to write, but it started, at the beginning of the season, and it started 6 pages earlier as well. We were trying to work up to that moment. So I think it was a really fun, kind of like larger, big picture puzzle to work backwards from.
In a lot of ways, it's an episode of breaking points too. For Poppy, the narrator, it's a breaking point where she, like you said, Kevin, she goes from being enemy to ally. For Charles in his relationship, it's a breaking point, a break-up point, haha. And an emotional breaking point for Oliver and for Mabel too. That I don't know that I can't remember if we went into it with that realization, but I think there's definitely something thematically happening that's resonating between those storylines, and that visceral breaking point for Mabel, like Ben said, was something that we had always intended to place at some point in the season, and it felt like that was the right moment.
Another character who's reached her breaking point is Poppy. Here's Adina.
So towards the end of this episode, in a phone call with Mabel, Poppy starts dishing some dirt on Cinda. Yeah. Does Poppy have an important role to play in the next few episodes?
I mean, I think I'm part of the puzzle. I mean, everybody has one of the puzzle pieces. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me like they, keep it open at the end of this episode to be able to maybe use Poppy for something.
Poppy likes to be used. Let's just say.
Very cryptic.
Do it.
I do.
Hey, Keener, guess what?
What, KK?
It's time for my favorite part of the show.
The Whodunit Summit.
This is where Keener and I, based on what we've seen so far, write down who we think the killer is, seal it in an envelope until right now when we rip open the envelope and explain why we picked who we picked. Keener.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Are you ready? I'm going to rip yours open. Ready? Hold on. There we go. And you picked Poppy.
Yes. Listen.
Again?
Again, I'm going to go for it.
Time?
I think I've picked her did I pick her 3 times now? I think so.
At least twice.
At least twice. At least the second time. I don't know. I just feel that there's things bubbling under. It's just bubbling under. You know
seething?
What I mean? Like it's seething. It's something.
Resentment.
It's oozing. Something's happening where I think Poppy, she just wants to. Maybe she explodes every now and then. So I just believe. Now I'm thinking about it. Probably isn't Poppy, but I'm going to stick with it. Poppy.
Stick to your guns.
Stick to my guns. Okay, now it's your turn.
Yes.
Ready?
Now we have a real suspect.
Open yours. You have a real suspect. How dare you, sir? Okay, here we go. It is Cinda. Okay, very good. Why Cinda again, KK?
Again. Well, it's funny. I think you picked Poppy and I picked Cinda for the first episode, and we're doing it again now.
I think so.
I just don't like Cinda. I think there's something going on there. I think she's calculating. I think she would do anything for her podcast. And even on a lesser note, I think she doesn't want to have to travel somewhere like Oklahoma or leave town. She wants to stay in New York. So doing this case allows her to do that. And she does not like the attention Charles, Oliver, and Mabel have been taking away from her podcast.
Look at how you say that.
By naming her podcast Only Murderers.
Yeah.
So those were my original ideas.
Okay, I like your pick. I'm not going to steal it right now, maybe next episode, because remember in the very beginning, I don't know why, I keep going back to Cinda in that hoodie. Wasn't she like in a red hoodie or something? The very last season, she was in a hoodie. Wasn't that her?
Oh, the very first episode.
And I don't know why. Why is she in a hoodie? And then there's hoodies, with blood all over.
I think it was raining, to be fair. But,
well, that's called an umbrella or something, or a raincoat. I mean, not a hoodie. Thanks for listening to Season 2, Episode 6 of Only Murders in the Pod. Our inbox is open again, so please send over your thoughts and theories to onlymurders@strawhutmedia.com. And if you're enjoying the show, like I know you are, please leave us a rating and a review. It really helps people find the show.
Only Murders in the Pod is a production of Straw Hut Media, hosted by Elizabeth Keener,
me,
and Kevin Lawn. Produced by Ryan Tillotson and Maggie Bowles. Associate producer is Stephen Markley, original music by Kyle Merritt, and Only Murders theme music by Siddhartha Khosla. Big thanks to John Hoffman, Xavier Salas, Louisa Maltini, and the entire Hulu team.
KK, it's time to read some fan mail.
Fan mail.
Yay. Woohoo.
We got a lot of good responses this week.
We always get great responses, and I wish we could talk about all of them, but it's just too difficult. But I just wanted to one person, Renee, said, here, this was so interesting. She said, so I was really skeptical of the idea that Lenora and Rose are the same person, but Lenora roses are a real flower. Look how pretty and complicated they are. That's a real flower. Lenora Rose.
So Lenora is a type of rose. Yes.
Isn't that interesting? Yes. So somebody said a pen name. Remember the pen name that someone mentioned that could be, when a lot of artists have pen names and things like that, and they put, authors, all of it. So many have different pen names. And so
that could be her artist pen name.
Yes. And it could just be her. Yeah. Right. And who's to say she really is Bunny's mom? Did anybody ever meet Bunny's mom? We don't know. We don't know any of that yet.
So, I'm picking a letter from Ken A. And I'm picking him because he had a very interesting theory and one that I had never even thought of. But he suspects that superfan Marv, remember he's one of the Arconiacs?
Yes. Right.
He suspects him because he said in the diner that he knows about the secret passageways because he's done mold remediation for them.
Right.
And he said in an earlier episode that Marv has issues with women and authority over men, and that could be a potential reason for not liking Bunny.
I'm going to have to look back. I don't even remember that. A lot of people think it's Marv. A lot of people think that it's possibly Poppy. It's all over the place. It really is.
It is all over the place.
Right. Wait, listen, the anagrams are really fast. Somebody said, Lucy, sometimes she's called Loose. And if you move it around, it's Clue. So that's interesting. I mean, I just like when
and
just
Emily,
go for it.
Emily, speaking of anagrams, Emily B, she said that Mrs. Gambolini, the bird, is a perfect anagram for M. Mora sibling. And she
Mabel,
says, does Mabel have a secret sibling, another Mora?
Wow, this is fascinating. Everybody, that you dive deep. I mean, I didn't get to say there's other people like Rob. Thank you for yours. Matt,
Ethan, Rhonda, Heidi.
You just keep going.
Keep them coming.
Keep them coming. Thank you so much. Amazing. Oh, one other thing. Someone said that there are 14 floors on the real Arconia. So someone thinks Amy Schumer up there.
The actual real building.
Yeah.